Carrie, such a pleasure to have you. And we would like to talk about 50 years of history. It's amazing for us. It's such an inspiring thought to see that you are ahead of an institution with so much experience, so much history. So let us talk about that. First, please introduce yourself just to the Brazilian that doesn't know you yet.
Hello, I'm Terry Klein, and I am the president and the CEO at the National MPS Society in the United States. And I'm also the parent of 4 children, and our youngest daughter, Jennifer, has a related disease to MPS called mucolipidosis, type 3. It's great to be here.
Thank you a lot. So, dear, this year, 2023, National MPS Society completes 50 years, an incredible conquest to a civil society institution. We would like to know what were the main achievements of the NMS in these years.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I think the board of our directors, which I am governed by in a nonprofit space within our country, is in awe themselves that we are beginning what we refer to as our 50th year, and we'll celebrate this over the next, 18 months. And we think about the first parents that came together to form this organization in the 70s when there was nothing. And it was I love to share this story because it was 2 very young mothers in their early 20s that came together. And it was an MPS mom, an MPS 1 mom, and an ML2, an I-cell mother that came together at a hospital at Johns Hopkins Hospital here in our country. And they met Dr. Elizabeth Newfield. And one of the children was misdiagnosed for MPS 1, Hurler syndrome, when she actually had ML. And these 2 moms made the decision that they needed to do something more and to advocate. And they formed back then what was referred to just simply as the Society for MPS, is what they had called it. But they met Dr. Elizabeth Newfield, and that changed everything. And so for the first decade, that small group grew very small. It was before the internet. It was before we had the communication highways that we have now. But it did grow, and they created newsletters, and they had picnics, and they reached out to one another, and they guided each other, and they formed regional gatherings. And that grew into what we call the next decade, in which we started to form what was more of a formal organization with the board of directors governing and overseeing revenues because families wanted to fundraise. All of this was still kind of pre-internet timeframe. And so we were still relying heavily on the mail system, and it was telephones and it was mail, but they stayed connected. And one of the beauties of being an organization like this is that someone had the foresight to archive everything that was ever done here at the society. So we have every printed piece of paper, a copy of it going all the way back to that 1973-74 timeframe. Every piece of paper has a copy. And so we're able to look back at time historically to see how it grew. So it's been quite amazing. Yeah.
So, dear, we are talking about half a century, and a lot of things changed during this period. How do you evaluate the reality of the MPS patients in the US 70s when you compare all the possibilities of the beginning of the 21st century?
That's a really good question because I can't even imagine what families were given in terms of information back in the 70s and 80s. We knew little. We had some information. They may not have always been given the information through a genetic counselor. That might not have happened. It might have been what we refer to here as a primary care physician, but not much was known. You couldn't go to the internet to find answers, and there certainly wasn't treatments yet. We didn't have the development of treatments. And so when I think about those early days, even before the 70s, before the organization was formed, what families had to go through, what grief they went through when they were given the diagnosis that their child wasn't going to live past the age of 10 or 12 or 15. to where we are, in the early 2000s, when we had those first breakthroughs with the science discoveries from Dr. Elizabeth Newfield and Dr. Emil Kakkis for the first enzyme replacement therapy of L-Durazyme for MPS1, and how that changed everything. And it only didn't change it for MPS1, but now we have therapies for MPS2, MPS4, MPS6, and MPS7 through the enzyme replacement therapy. And then we had the transplants. The transplants were getting better for patients with MPS1. There was more understanding around how to deliver the protocol so that we have more children surviving through a transplant. And that's incredible discovery, incredible science. Today, when we have a family conference, we now have adults attending those family conferences. And when I went to the family conferences back in the early 2000s, you had barely any adults with MPS that were coming, or with ML. There was a handful. And now we have 40, 50, 60 adults that are coming to the family conference because they have life-saving therapies. What a difference it is. And as a dear friend of mine likes to say, science changes everything. And we are fortunate in the MPS space. We are fortunate that we had MPS scientists that were relentless in those early days and researchers, and they didn't give up. And because of their not giving up, and because of advocacy groups like ours in the United States and yours, it makes it possible for emerging companies to be there to bring new therapies. And so it's a real shift over 50 years, a real shift.
Yeah, indeed. You have to celebrate. Huh? So you are a leader and also a mother of a patient with MPS. Mucopolysaccharidosis, we can say, is still a challenge for the medical societies.
Yeah. Jay, I called my daughter Jennifer. Jay, we're fortunate. And so I'll start there first. We're fortunate in that Jennifer has what we refer to as an attenuated form of the disease. I don't always like to say that word because it has been nothing easy about it. She's had a number of surgeries, but that's all we have for mucolipidosis type 3 because we don't have a treatment yet. And because of that, she's just had managed care, a number of surgeries, like I had said, but she's also a scientist. And so she has been able to take herself and move through the collegiate area and move into science and consider medical school. And she's now working for a biotech company in rare diseases. I am so proud to be her mother, and she inspired me and her family to move as leaders in this MPS space that we're in and change what we did as a family. Our whole family, this wasn't a move by me. I like to share with friends and with others around the world that Jenny wasn't diagnosed. Our family was diagnosed with mucolipidosis type 3. Our family was diagnosed in 1998 with this disease, and it changed everything for us. But when you're talking about an organization like the National MPS Society or where you're at, I am passionate about raising funds, and I am passionate about saving children. And I think about the mission that we serve, and I think about that we are here for a small period of time. My goal to come into this organization is to lead, and my goal when I retire is to leave it better than when I came. I'm a steward of this mission while I am here, and there were people before me, and there are going to be people after me, but whoever comes after me will certainly receive an organization that has grown leaps and bounds since when I took the seat. And we have so much work to do for these kids and for these adults with MPS and ML. That we have life-saving therapies, they have other challenges. And so the organization will continue to evolve because of that.
You can say that you paved the way.
I helped.
And in 50 years, the National MPS Society witnessed a lot of changes in treatment. What was the most important for the patients? And how do you see the first movements of disruptive treatment as genetic therapy, for example?
Well, that fear of when you're first diagnosed, I can't imagine for families that didn't have a potential therapy, except for I'm in those shoes because of my daughter not having one. And I think about how today when we have a diagnosis, we now have half of our diseases have some type of a therapy. And that has brought so much hope. And hope is a really, really, really important word. It's a very important word because you can't lose hope. The science that we will gain and that we learn from other lysosomal diseases and from MPS will help us find the answers for Sanfilippo. It will help us find the answers for mucolipidosis. And also, with these new potential emerging companies, we will have second generation therapies that will be even better than enzyme replacement therapy. Enzyme replacement therapy is a life-saving therapy, but we know science is showing us that there's going to be even better options. And that is an incredible space to be, knowing that hope will be there for better optional treatments, but also we will finally crack that hard puzzle, that hard nut in terms of determining what the answers will be for Sanfilippo so they have a treatment and what the answers will be for mucolipidosis. And I think that hanging on to hope and seeing those original enzyme replacement therapies be approved in our country by the FDA is allowing other families, even though they're in grief because they don't have a treatment, hanging on to that word of hope. It's because they know that we will get there. Science is hard, but we're going to get there. There's enough companies in this space trying to solve these problems. And we're just lucky. Honestly, it is hard. These are hard diseases. They're devastating, but we're fortunate that this much research is happening for our MPS disorders.
Okay. A great challenge to all civil institutions is the dialogue with the government and the Congress, and how the National MPS Society has been promoting these topics.
Well, the society was very fortunate about 25 years ago to have a working board of directors that really understood the importance of networking with our government and understanding the relationships with in our country, senators and congressmen. And so it didn't become a race against which side of the government that you wanted to be on, whether you were a Republican or you were a Democrat. It wasn't about this. This is one issue that all of us needed to face, which was pediatric health. And how do we work in pediatric health? And when families receive a diagnosis, how can the federal and the state legislators work to make lives better for those that are dealing with these devastating diagnoses? And that board of directors formed an advocacy committee. And that working advocacy committee still goes on today. And we have about 20, anywhere from like 20 to maybe 35 people that call in monthly, where we work on very specific advocacy initiatives. We identify each year appropriations language that we put forward so we can have more funding from the NIH. We don't have other advocacy groups that are doing that at all in our country, but it's a big lift for us. We work in newborn screening at the state level, and we have a lot of troops on the ground that are helping us for newborn screening. And then we champion behind very key legislation that will be around possibly the Medicaid or Medicare policies of our country, so that we're helping our families have better navigation and understand what is available to them. We know that the relationships that we have in Washington, D.C. on the federal level and here in our country, all 50 states, are crucial for rare diseases, crucial for MPS, but we've been told repeatedly by other organizations they're grateful to us that we have paved the way in this area of rare disease legislation. And I'm just proud of this board of directors that champions behind that work. It is the third tenet of what we do. We fund research, we support families, and we advocate.
Okay. So how does the institution capacitate the parents to a better dialogue with doctors? You know, this is a problem in Brazil.
Yeah, you know, this is so important. I think when families receive the diagnosis, it's hard to comprehend or understand that you actually might begin to learn more than your doctors do. You're going to know more perhaps than any of the physicians that possibly look at your child, minus a few experts. And so we made a decision here many years ago that family support was going to wrap around educational pieces and the written word, booklets and pamphlets and resource guides, webinars, our annual family conference that we have, our regional family gatherings that we do, and more recently, over the past 6 years, we have something here called Pathways program now. And 6 years ago, we incorporated a new program that works with our families at the time of diagnosis. And we have social workers that are employed by the National MPS Society that work with us. And they fly around the country to meet with families face to face at the time of diagnosis. And right now, we have our social workers that are away from our office a minimum of 2 weeks a month. They're in the air and they're meeting with families because we want them to get the best education possible so that they can have the best dialogue with the doctors. We learned that when you're able to help level those families up and teach them the language and share with them what they need to know, that when they go to the doctor's office with all their notes and they're ready with their notes, those doctors are going to listen to them because the words that are going to come out are educated words. They're words of understanding of the disease. They have credibility because they've talked to the organization that supports these diseases for 50 years. And that means something. I watched a family tell me that they've gone in and they didn't know a lot and the doctor didn't treat them possibly with all the kindness or sensitivities they could have. But when they went to the next appointment 3 months later, they were armed and ready. They knew exactly what they were going to ask, and they went in and the doctor was astounded at what they knew. And so the Pathways program is an in-person program, but we do a lot of telesupport too and follow-up. So however you deliver it, we are a true organization that believes that the families have a diagnosis of MPS, but in our country, the social workers wrap around all of the needs of the family. They don't just look at the diagnosis, but they're looking at any of the other deficits the family's struggling with in order for them to have a better ecosystem to care for their child.
Great. So to conclude this interview, could you tell us what are the plans of the National MPS Society for the next 50 years?
Oh my goodness. One of our board members said our goal is to not exist, that we've already found the cures and that we wouldn't have to exist any longer. And I don't know if that's ever going to be the case because I know that we will always have children that are diagnosed with these diseases at birth. And so if we're having children that are diagnosed with these diseases at birth, I think about how can we so quickly get a treatment, a life-saving treatment into that baby. I think about how newborn screening is going to save lives. Newborn screening is going to change everything in this country for these diseases. Because when we can scan that baby, we can go through that screening and we can find out if that child has MPS. And if there is a life-saving therapy, they're going to be able to access that therapy within days or within weeks. We're seeing it happen with MPS 1, and we're starting to see it happen now that newborn screening has been added to what we refer to in our country. It's a big term, but it's called the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel. And now that MPS 2 has been approved to be added there, we're going to have more and more states screening those babies. Right now, 80% of our country is screening for MPS 1. 80% of the babies born in this country are being screened for MPS 1. And we now have babies getting enzyme replacement therapy within days versus waiting a year before the disease raised havoc. So when I think about the next 50 years, I think about better therapies, the next generation therapies, and those therapies reaching those babies at birth. And I think about how the life and how we see MPS is going to be drastically different. And the types of things that we're going to support are going to be more on the advocacy side so they can have the highest quality of life. And gosh darn it, I really hope that we can get to cures. I hope we can, because San Filippo is in desperate need of a therapy, A, B, C, and D, and so is mucolipidosis. We've got to get answers. And I know in the next 50 years, we will have those answers, but gosh, I hope it's sooner than that.
Thank God. I can't wait to see that. So thank you a lot I just like to end this interview asking you if you would like to leave a message to the Brazilian patients with MPS.
We are one country here in the United States, but we work globally, and working with all of you in Brazil and working with others around the world. This is how we get things done when we can work together. This is a collaboration. It is important that we don't leave people behind, that when we recognize there's inequities in the world in terms of receiving therapies, please know that in this country, it hurts us. And we don't want that burden to be there. And so our answers of the future are, how can we have access to therapies for everyone around the world? That is crucial. And don't give up hope. Hope is everything. Days move by so fast, and cherish the time that you have today with your family. Thank you.
Thank you, dear.